Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I wanted to provide some comments in response to what Premier Doug Ford said yesterday on two particular points. So the first is paid sick leave. For many, many months now, opposition leaders, but also mayors, public health leaders, those with incredible experience and expertise in healthcare, in epidemiology, newspaper editorials, literally, there has been an exceptionally broad spectrum of opinion that has been coming forward for months to demand that Doug Ford stop being so stubborn, so ideologically driven, and actually come up with a provincial government funded paid sick leave program that would permit thousands and thousands of essential workers, the women and men who've been on the front lines, keeping our store shelves stocked and helping to keep our economy moving, to give them the chance, should they feel unwell, should they actually have symptoms of COVID, to be able to stay at home and still financially support their families during this crisis. And notwithstanding the near universal advocacy for Doug Ford to do this, he continues to say no. He continues to point to a federal program that doesn't provide the seamless and adequate support that's needed, not just to protect the workers and their families, although that's critically important, but to protect all of us in terms of stopping the spread of the COVID-19 virus or the new variants of concern. And yesterday, shockingly, on a day when Doug Ford should have apologized across the board for once again dropping the ball in terms of his inability to lead Ontario through this crisis, he decided to lash out and to attack others for, as he put it, playing politics on this issue. It's not playing politics, Doug. It's actually doing the right thing or trying to force you to see the light and do the right thing. And so I just want to say one more time to Doug Ford, on the issue of a provincial government-funded paid sick leave program, listen to the experts, listen to your colleagues in the legislature. Yes, listen to opposition politicians. I, for one, would be happy to work with you and your government to create the kind of program, paid sick leave program, provincial government funded, that doesn't put an additional burden on small business owners in particular, that will help us get through the rest of this third wave while the vaccines are being rolled out. So I sincerely, once again, hope Doug Ford will do the right thing. I'm exceedingly discouraged by the comments that he made yesterday. There really is no place for that kind of political attack in the midst of what we are all dealing with. So that's item number one. Item number two, we all heard Doug Ford say yesterday, Wednesday, that he decided that he needed to take action with a stay-at-home order because he saw the ICU numbers on Tuesday, and those alarmed him sufficiently so that he was motivated to finally, belatedly, take the strong action that was needed. Now, I just can't understand that. For many months now, I and others have been questioning Doug Ford's competence as it relates to handling the second wave, the third wave, the variants of concern. But that comment in particular, fast on the heels of him leaving shopping malls open and then blaming people for going to the shopping malls that he decided to leave open, tells me that we've moved well beyond the issue of competence or incompetence. I actually think if that's true, if it took until Tuesday, just a couple of days ago, for Doug Ford to realize that ICU numbers were out of control, when the rest of us have known this was the case for weeks, that the numbers were going in the wrong direction, publicly reported numbers for weeks, this is no longer about incompetence. This is about negligence. It's a scary concept to believe that someone in charge of leading our province through this third wave to get us to the other side of COVID-19 could be this negligent as it relates to discharging his responsibilities. So I hope Doug Ford clarifies that it did not take him until Tuesday of this week to realize that ICU numbers were spiraling badly out of control. And I sincerely hope that he will move forward with a provincial government-funded paid sick leave program, something that I will never stop fighting for because it's the right thing to do. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, a reminder that if you have any questions, please either raise your hand using the Zoom function or write to the chat. And the first question is Colin DeMello from CTV Toronto.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Del Duca. The province is reprioritizing its vaccination strategy to focus on, people 18 plus in some postal codes.
Yeah.
But today we're learning that they are not going to be booking via the provincial website. Instead, there's going to be mobile crews going out to their buildings and to their churches and workplaces, etc. I'm wondering if you have any concerns about that, because I mean, right now it seems like the responsibility is being downloaded onto the public health units, and the public health units were kind of caught off guard with that new announcement.
Well, first, let me say, look, it's a good move to decide to start deploying the vaccine in that more targeted way. I think that will be helpful in the mid to long term. I think that's what we all want to see. But this wouldn't be the first example throughout this pandemic of two things. One, the confusion and the fact that public health units, as you said, didn't seem to realize that this is the way this would be unfolding. So it kind of fell into their laps. And secondly, just the general concept of the competence and the confusion around how this is being handled. So this goes right, Colin, this goes right to the heart of what the problem is with how Doug Ford has led Ontario, especially since literally last September. There's been no consistency. There's been no coherent plan to deal with all of the challenges that we've had to face. He's offloaded or downloaded responsibilities to public health units, previously to school boards. He's tried to kick things upstairs to the federal government. He's literally blamed everyone else, downloaded or passed the buck to everyone else, except looking in the mirror and realizing what his responsibility is. And when the numbers don't sort of do what he wants them to do, he lashes out, like he did yesterday when he criticized myself and the other opposition leaders for, as he put it, playing politics with a life and death issue like paid sick leave, because he's been unable or unwilling to actually deliver on that kind of program. So what I would much prefer to see, what I think people in Ontario would want, is that competent leadership that would say in advance to public health units, look, we're going to recalibrate. We're actually going to give you the vaccines that you need to deploy at a sort of a more grassroots level, in a more kind of visceral way, neighborhood by neighborhood, and actually get the buy-in from public health units before making the announcement and dropping it in their laps. And so it just, again, it's one in a very long series of missteps, half-hearted half measures that we've been talking about now for days. And to me, it tells me Doug Ford is so badly in over his head and is so unable or unwilling to understand what his job is, that this is why we continue to have the problems we have.
Follow up.
Thank you. And just on the targets that the premier is setting, he's saying 40% of all adults by the end of this 4-week stay-at-home period should be vaccinated. They vaccinated more than 100,000 people yesterday. Do you feel, given that the 40% of all adults target is realistic?
Listen, I'm an optimist by nature, and I want it to be true. But what I've witnessed throughout the pandemic is an awful lot of hollow words and platitudes from Doug Ford. What I want to see is the real action. And I want us to be able to see real time how we were doing, like measuring up against the 40% goal that he set. I hope it happens. If it does happen, I'll be the first person to applaud it. But again, we've now lived through months and months of hollow platitudes coming from Doug Ford, not backed up with meaningful, competent action. So I'm hopeful for the best, but I do fear the worst.
Okay, next question is Jeff Gray from the Globe and Mail.
Hi there. Hi, Stephen. Wanted to ask you just about your comments about the premier learning on Tuesday that ICU numbers were out of control. The Dr. Williams also said that it was over the weekend in the last few days that he noticed a even faster than anticipated increase in ICU admissions. So I wondered if your comments extend to him. Does Dr. Williams need to be replaced?
So listen, we've seen now modeling that's being put forward by Doug Ford's own science table days and days and days ago that suggested that we're right about where we could very likely have ended up. So that this shouldn't have come as a surprise. Not only that, I mean, I'm a layperson. I'm not the Premier of Ontario at this point in time, but every single day on Twitter and other social media, through all of your reporting, we've all known that the ICU numbers were climbing. They were going in the wrong direction, that it was starting to get scary. So it's just completely mind-boggling to me that the Premier of Ontario could have stood at the podium yesterday and said with a straight face that it was only the day before that he learned that the ICU numbers were going so badly out of control. And that is what triggered or motivated him to take strong action. I don't get that, Jeff. It doesn't ring true to me. But if it is true, this is not just incompetent, it is negligent. And that's really important for us to recognize. There's a difference between those two. And so I'm hoping maybe today, maybe tomorrow, the next time Doug Ford speaks publicly, he'll be able to elaborate or clarify that he was perhaps one of the few people left in Ontario who didn't realize we had a challenge in ICUs until Tuesday. It's scary if the Premier of Ontario was in that position. Dr. Williams, to your point, I'm also surprised that he would have said something like that only occurred to him over the weekend, given what we've seen in media, on social media, what we've seen in daily reports about ICU numbers. But I've said this from the very beginning. The buck stops with Doug Ford. He is the Premier of Ontario. He is the person that was elected by the people of this province to lead us, and he has consistently dropped the ball. The scary part for me, again, is that up until now, I've just presumed it was incompetence because Doug Ford doesn't really believe in government. Yesterday, for the first time, I felt like it was willfully negligent on his part to claim that he didn't know about the ICU numbers until Tuesday.
Follow up.
Okay, just to follow up, but by extension, you're also saying it's willfully negligent on Dr. Williams's part. There's no space between the remarks they made publicly yesterday. So do you think he needs to go?
Well, there might be no space between their remarks, but only one person was elected by the people of Ontario to lead us through good times and bad, and that person's Doug Ford. So what Doug Ford demonstrated to me yesterday was that he's not up to this job, that he has no gas left in his tank, that he's way in over his head, and that's scary. So what Doug Ford needs to do now is to start listening to not just one or two other people, but to the members of his own science table. Maybe he needs to call in, some other expertise. We have 3 medical officers of health, Toronto, Peel, and Ottawa, who penned the letter to him a couple of days ago talking about this stuff. There's lots of very strong expertise that we have in this province that is supposed to be helping Doug Ford navigate this challenge. So again, I don't know who he's listening to, but the buck stops with Doug Ford.
All right, before we move to the next question, just one last reminder to please write to the chat if you have a question. Next question is Richard Southern from 680 News.
Stephen, how are you? Good morning.
Thanks, Richard.
I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to pick up on what Jeff said there, because I mean, Dr. Williams said it was unforeseeable that ICU capacity would swell to the extent that we're at now, but the science table was saying that weeks ago.
That's
right. You don't think that Dr. Williams holds any responsibility here on that in this front?
Well, let me give you a perspective from someone who had the honor of serving inside the cabinet room for 4 years in a couple of different senior cabinet positions. Very often, I'm outside of a time of crisis. Let me be really clear about this. I was given advice, I was given feedback, but there's a certain degree of responsibility, professionalism, experience, expertise that you bring to the table when you're a cabinet minister under good circumstances. And so when you doubt occasionally what you might be hearing from one source, you have a responsibility and a duty to reach beyond that one source. So in this case, again, what's shocking to me is that when the science table is saying a lot of things about where we might be on ICUs, and to your point, they said it weeks ago when the Ontario Hospital Association, the OMA, mayors are talking about this, individual regional public health leaders are talking about it, and potentially one person in David Williams says something to you if you're the Premier. I believe Doug Ford has an obligation to dig a little deeper, to actually try to unpack it a little bit more, to question perhaps the advice that he's getting, if he's getting that advice from one individual. And what we've seen consistently through this pandemic is that level of curiosity, that level of intellectual capacity seems to be completely absent in Doug Ford. And I'm talking about my experience during good times. This pandemic obviously is not the best of times. It's just about the worst of times. And so what I've been looking for is for Doug Ford to step up and say, yes, I get advice from a lot of individual people, but I'm prepared to question that advice. I'm prepared to reach beyond one or two individuals to find out, if one person's saying this, why am I getting letters from other public health leaders saying something different? That's the level again of intellectual curiosity and capacity that we need in our leaders. And again, it's been missing in Doug Ford, and it was missing this week if his comments about the ICUs are true. that he didn't realize till Tuesday that this was a problem.
Well, like Stephen, I mean, if the science advisory table was saying that the ICUs would swell, I assume the premier would have gotten that knowledge, right? Why do
I'd like to assume that too. I don't know.
Right. So right. But okay, let's say he did. I mean, why would the premier wait? Do you think? What was it for political reasons? Do you think? Why do you assume he waited?
I assume he waited because he's in over his head. I assume that he waited because he's been trying to, I guess, satisfy multiple different constituencies in his own caucus, in his own cabinet, perhaps. I don't know who Doug Ford listens to when he stubbornly refuses to introduce paid sick leave when everybody's telling him it's the right thing to do. I don't have a clue, Richard, who the guy is listening to. What I know is there's now, in these last few days alone, there's been a series of things that just bring this into really sharp relief for me. The shopping mall scenario that I talked about earlier in my comments today, his decision to lash out at me, Andrea Horvath, and Mike Schreiner around playing politics with paid sick leave when it's not just us and it's not about politics. And the fact of the matter that even though the science table and a whole series of others have been saying for weeks the ICUs were a problem, that he's claiming to the world that he didn't know until the day before yesterday that ICUs were a problem. This is now beyond, again, this is beyond competence or incompetence. It's negligent, it's inappropriate. He is in over his head. And, you know, that scares me as an Ontarian, not just as a political leader.
Next question, Laura Stone from the Globe and Mail.
Hi, Stephen. I just wanted to ask, I'm sorry, I missed off the top, but I wanted to ask more about these mobile units that are supposed to be reaching 18 years and over in hard hit areas in Peel and Toronto. Apparently people aren't going to be booking through the provincial system on that. Like, what is your view on how many details we're getting about this? Do you have any concerns about reaching the right people? What would you like to see happen when it comes to reaching these harder hit postal codes?
Well, my biggest concern is that, you know, again, it seems that the way Ford has approached this is not really ready for prime time. The fact that these details are now kind of coming out, that public health units didn't necessarily know that they would be responsible in the way that they will be responsible, that, you know, not using the provincial portal to schedule an appointment and instead doing it in a more grassroots way. It just seems very complex, very cumbersome, and badly executed so far. Look, the concept, I think, is the right one, that you want to start, as everyone has been saying, actually applying the water where the fire is burning brightest. So that concept is really good. But in order for it to be effective, the execution has to be equally strong. And in the first 24 hours, it seems to me that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And that, I think, does fall squarely at Doug Ford's feet because, you know, he is the premier.
Follow up?
And what about the move to vaccinate teachers or education workers next week? We're learning in those areas you'd called for everyone, all education workers to be vaccinated. Are you satisfied with just targeting those hard hit spots for now? And similarly, what do you think of the details regarding how those education workers are supposed to be reached and signed up for this?
Also, the bottom line for me is that I don't want schools to have to close in this province again for the balance of this school year as we continue to deal with the pandemic. It's been brutally tough on kids, on parents, on the system as a whole, all the women and men who work in the system. And so that's why last Thursday, and again earlier this week, I said to Doug Ford publicly, you've got the April break, you've got the vaccines. In theory, there should be enough infrastructure in place to do this. Use the 5, 6, or 7 days of the April break, use the schools as hubs, invite every single worker who, whether it's teacher, education assistant, principal, custodian, school bus driver, whoever it is, come to their own school, use it as a hub, get your shot. And, you know, that way, that's probably our strongest safeguarding against ever having to close the schools again. So while I am, I will say, encouraged to know after days and days and days of stubbornly refusing to move in the direction of vaccinating education workers, there has been a step in the right direction, a small step in the right direction. I still think it falls short of where we should be. And I also want to say, when I say a stubborn refusal, let's remember that for days, we've heard from both Doug Ford and his education minister, there's nothing to see here. There's no problem. The schools are perfectly fine. And so this is just, again, I don't understand why it's like they have to be forced into a corner before they take the action that the rest of the world can see is actually the right way to go. So mildly encouraged, like in a very, it's the right step. It's a very small step. I think they could have been far more ambitious, and that would have been our best way to deal with not closing schools again.
Okay, there are no other questions on the line. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.